Good afternoon and happy December and happy Tuesday, I think it is, isn't it? So welcome to the webinar for Getting Value from Management Review. My name's Jude and I'll be talking with you for the next sort of 45 minutes. If you're not aware really of NQA and what we do, we're a global certification body, and if it's your first time joining us, then don't be a stranger. By all means, get in touch to hear about what it is that we do in terms of audits and standards. We're the top 3 in the UK for 9, 14 and 45. I'll be covering those 3 standards within the webinar, and we're really proud to be able to certificate a wide variety of different standards and industries, and also quite proud to be able to deliver the training for those as well. So don't worry if I go a little bit too fast. 45 minutes isn't too long, and I'm conscious you're probably all on your lunch as well. We'll be doing questions at the end. You'll be able to put them in a little box. Hopefully that'll be clear. You'll get a copy of the slides and also a copy of the recording with that. So the object of today's webinar and how this actually came about was quite nice. So it was actually client requested, and speaking to other clients that this was coming about. Quite a few people have expressed, well, we're not actually too sure what management review is all about and what we're meant to be doing to get the most effective results from it. So that's quite nice, and thank you to the company that brought that to us. So we're looking at the practical implementation of the inputs required, so what we must do for ISO 9001, 14 and 45 as well. We're going to look at how we actually interpret those requirements for an actual business lead, who should attend, how often we should be doing it, how we're going to engage with the attendees, and then how we plan and measure the outputs so that they actually add value to your business as an alternative little checklist. So the purpose of management review is solely to evaluate the business, and what you'll probably find is that we have quite a few meetings throughout the week, even daily, where we will discuss certain tasks or what we're trying to achieve within the business. And the idea of the management review agendas for all 3 standards is to ensure that A, you're complying with the ISO standards, and B, it's a logical progression so that we can actually evaluate the areas of the business that we are hoping to achieve success in. So I thought I'd share with you an example which I've created myself, but it's something that we often see, particularly with 9001, an upgrade example. And the reason we're presented with this is just total misunderstanding, really, of what's required from the management review. So when we talk about previous actions, we'll see that there haven't really been any, or that we've completed what those actions were, and it doesn't really tell us too much more about that. We'll often find internal and external issues don't often change, and you might find the same with context and with interested parties as well, that maybe once we've identified who they are and what they are, there's not too much more to do with them. But we will discuss and go into what the requirements for that are. Objectives and policy. Again, we'll normally see that we've achieved objectives and there's no change to the policy itself. Probably 70% of the time we'll see that objectives have been changed to something else, and it might be that a percentage has become harder to achieve, or that we're focusing on another, but there's never really a huge difference year on year with objectives, if I'm honest. More and more, particularly since COVID, we've seen that clients aren't identifying non-conformities at audit, and that the improvement logs that people have had or the non-conformance registers that people have had aren't particularly being expanded on, or there's no change. It's a case of nothing's happened, everything's fine. And audits as well, we've noticed there's a significant reduction in findings at internal audits. So it may be the case it's because they've been conducted remotely. It may be the case that we've maybe changed who the auditor is, or it may be, you know, we're not completing that function of the business, or we've got less people. There's many, many reasons, but it is something that we have picked up upon as external bodies. Legal compliance, so that would be relevant for 14 and 45. Again, we will often see we've reviewed the legal register and there is no change. And so as a result of that, there's generally no action really for the company to do. So what I've tried to do is hopefully save you a little bit of work. And I've gone through the standards and lifted the management review requirements for all three. So as a little key, anything that's in red covers all three standards, and anything that's in this light blue covers just 14 and 45. And what we'll happily see is that there's a lot of red, so it actually crosses over quite well. So if you're certified to all three standards, this should hopefully be a useful tool for you. And after we've gone through, I'm not going to read out all the requirements for you. You can have a look at that when you get a copy of the slides. But what we will do, once we've just had a little skip through and confirmed, yes, there's a lot of red there, there's a lot of carryover information, is we're going to look at how we implement that and turn it into a useful business tool rather than the checklist that a lot of people unfortunately have. Okay, so one big struggle that companies seem to have a problem with is when we look at customer feedback. Again, quality objectives, how they've been met, non-conformances, corrective action, monitoring and measuring results, and audit results. So we know these are going to cover all three standards because they're in red. Is we miss off the element that says that we need information on that. So even if we say, okay, objectives have been met, super, great, we need to be able to see, well, how have they been met? How have you measured it? What have you measured it against? What are you going to do in the future? And how have you determined what your new objectives will be? And that's exactly the same really for 14,001 and 45 as well. If we say we have no non-conformity and we have no corrective action, it's often a good idea as well to explain again, how do we know that? So when we look back at the internal audit results, if there's no findings, then maybe it's a good idea at management review to delve into what exactly did we look at, what objective evidence do we have, and hopefully find something, not because we're looking for non-compliance, but because we're looking for improvement. And if we haven't got any actions to do, we can't really improve very effectively. So again, just floating through, you'll recognise this as the agenda, and again in your own time it's a good idea to have a look and see what filters through. So don't be foxed in that if you've only got 9001, that you might think, well actually there's not a massive amount more to do for 14 and 45, because these are quite niche requirements when it's talking about legislations and compliance obligations, aspects and impacts, and how you would communicate those with interested parties, because of course they will be slightly different in terms of being answerable to Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive as well. But importantly, it is worth thinking about 9001 does have the clause which talks about making sure you're compliant with legislation and regulatory bodies, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. So the idea behind management review, as we say, is evaluation, and what the standard is trying to do is provide objectives which you must evaluate and provides a logical route for you to follow, but you're not limited to those prompts. So if we take a look at that natural route of what issues do we have, what resources do we have we had anything that we can do better in the business, this is sort of a natural conversation. But if there's any specific activities within your business which would be beneficial discussing, then management review is a good forum to do that with. And you'll never be delivered a finding for having too much information in management review, as long as you can actually hit those areas of the agenda and make sure that you are providing enough information. You shouldn't get a finding. It's an opportunity to get together and focus on what is the business doing, how are we doing it, what do we want to do, and how to improve and also maintain that compliance to the standard, which won't then affect your certification. In terms of frequency, what all the standards say is that management reviews must be at planned intervals. So what we generally see is that it's common to plan for a once-a-year review. So if we're looking at all these areas and doing a deep dive over 12 months, and we're going to set our objectives based on what we talk about in management review and set our policy, which is going to be our framework, that's quite a long time, isn't it, in between, to have a think about, well, are we achieving it? How are we achieving it? So you come back 12 months later and say, lovely, what's happened? And if we've not achieved something, we've had some major issues, then we've possibly not kept up enough. So as a good practice, maybe twice a year or every quarter, maybe you don't have to do the full management review, but just a little monitoring, where are we up to, is a good idea. But of course, if we're going to do that, because we're talking about top leadership in these meetings, management, resource is going to be an issue. So how do we justify so many people out of the business if it's what we are likely discussing daily? So that's what we're going to talk about now, really, and how we put all of this together into practice. So hopefully now when we look at the agenda for management review, if we're being brutally honest, it's a garbled load of ISO words. So if we put it into plain, maybe business speak, it will hopefully become a more fruitful agenda for us. So if we put the right inputs in, we will hopefully produce the right or desired outputs, which will actually give us something to build on and enable us to, even if it is that once a year, have a really, really good discussion and bring some value. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is, what are your previous actions? And as we saw with the example, probably 9 times out of 10, we'll see no actions, or actions are completed. It's a really good idea to document what they are, because if there's no action, what are we improving? That's probably the first question. And if there have been actions, but we're not going to say what we've actioned, so to speak, then we don't know if maybe there's somebody else in the room that might have a different take on it, or it might be not fully actioned. It's good. Let's reflect. Let's evaluate. The next part on the agendas really is the internal and external issues. So again, what we'll normally see is that people still have manuals, and it's generally like a little box, and it'll say internal, external, and then it'll provide a little list, and it might be, can't think now off the top of my head, see it every day, but quite generic things. So internal, sourcing resource, computer going down, external, flood, or the pandemic. That's probably one that we've seen most recently, definitely. So they're things which aren't going to be a massive changing event in some respects. They're very generic. We don't drill down on what they are. So to have a good discussion about what the internal and external issues are, it might be worth looking at maintenance, your supply chain issues, if there are political requirements which are affecting your business or your product, and the resource as well, because this is certainly going to be ever changing, and supply chains at the moment are ever changing. And then it's worth talking about, well, where do we find this information out as well? So it can't be all just opinion or the news. It's where in the business is providing us with the information is often a good discussion to have. For all 3 standards, it's worth discussing legal and interested parties. So you'll have probably seen that the environment is an absolutely huge drive at the moment. So we know there's going to be legislation changes. We know there's going to be more fines. So even if you're not certified to 14,001, and even if you don't want to be certified to 14,001, it might be a good idea to start thinking about integrating the requirements of that system into your quality system, so that you can have some confidence, at least, that you are not going to fall foul of an environmental fine because you've, just through misguidance or lack of knowledge, breached some legislation there. It still does tie in with 9001, because obviously if you get a fine or if you get prosecuted for anything, then that is going to hugely impact on your interested parties and your business. It's often good to know about employment law updates, commercial updates, and of course, again, even if you're not certified to 45,001, health and safety updates as well. So I'm sure most of you in industry have either been visited by the HSE or know somebody who's been visited by the HSE in the times of COVID. They'll be doing lots of little spot checks, but of course they've not just been looking for COVID breaches, they have been looking for safety breaches in general as well, and issuing out fines and notices. So it's a good opportunity to see how good are we, and are we keeping people safe? Are we at risk of a fine? And it comes back to, well, how do we review this? So most people have registers, or they might have a software which will provide them with updates and let them know what's happening. And it's not something you have to do daily or weekly by any means, but it's keeping the eye out and just making sure yourself as a company that you have that confidence that you are compliant. We might want to consider as well who the critical parties are if we breach any legislation, or if we're not able to meet a regulatory requirement, what planning we need to put in place to ensure we can meet it in the future. So your critical ones you might consider your customer, because they're going to provide you with your revenue ostensibly, and equally your employees who we're putting at risk through non-compliance. Or, well, it could be physical really, couldn't it? Or it could be financial if we manage to get the company shut down. Objectives and policy, again, we know this covers all three standards. I think the key thing with this is to consider, what are we working towards, and do we do what we say we do? So lots of times we'll see a policy and it'll tell us that we're achieving customer satisfaction, or we are reducing near misses, or increasing is often the best way of putting it, so that we are making sure there's less accidents, or we are improving the environment. And of course, because it's your framework, your objectives will feed into that policy. So let's nail it down and actually decide what out of these things that we are working towards can we smartly measure, what will bring the value, and how are we going to observe that between now and the next meeting to ensure it's a consistency. The big one that you'll want to discuss is the process performance. So obviously ISO is all about processes. How do we meet them? How do we check them? And how do we make sure that they're effective? So this will be any process that you have in your business which is critical to the product. So it might be a sales process, it might be an operations process, it might be your purchasing process, it might be deliveries, goods in, all the critical things which are going to assist in efficiency and getting something out to the customer, whether it's a service or a product. So we're going to discuss each one at management review in some depth to make sure that we are efficient. We might find that the technology that we have is no longer working as well. So you'll know yourself, we're all online at the moment. Teams is a little bit of a hit and miss sometimes. Sometimes people prefer Zoom or Skype, but more and more the day-to-day operations are being managed through a technology now, and there is a certain expectation from your customers and from your suppliers that we have the ability to use technology and that we have the software that can connect with theirs or support what they're wanting you to do. So it's always good to ensure, can our technology support our operations? It's quite critical and quite topical at the moment as well. A good follow-on with that, excuse me, is the labour waste. So by having inefficient processes, we are wasting a lot of labour. We might be duplicating a lot of processes. We might be using somebody's time in an area that's just not required anymore because of the evolution of technology. So it's good to discuss that rather than just, yeah, sales are up, we're quite happy with that, nothing further to report. And these are genuine responses that we do see at management review. There are people who put really fantastic effort in, and you know, they may be 2 or 3 pages long of dialogue and notes and justifications of why they've discussed what they've discussed, and those are generally the best reviews because it gives the context as well of, well, how have we got to discuss this, and can you show me? And they're generally really good, really good. We want to be thinking about quality checking as well. So although we're going to be doing our audits once a year generally, or you'll pick an element every month of what you want to audit, what are we then doing to either look at deficit in the audits or discrepancies? Are we regularly reviewing effectiveness? And housekeeping as well. So we've spoken about, even if you don't want to be certified to 14 and 45, it's a safety measure, B, it looks nicer, and C, it keeps that fresh mind of that, are we in a good place? You generally find if your office is looking a bit tired and shabby, or if your warehouse is a complete and utter carnage, then the rest of the processes will follow in that manner as well. So it's keeping everybody fresh and motivated. It's always worth a good walk around. While you're doing that, you might want to include supplier control within these areas that we've just spoken about. So we're not limiting everything just to inside the business. We want to know as well, well, have your suppliers got a decent amount of technology? Are your suppliers quality checking? Are your suppliers compliant? Are your suppliers living in a good, clean, organised environment? And how do you do that? We might want to review incidents as well. How many near misses? How many accidents? Have we breached an environment legislation or other commercial? And whilst you're doing that, it's an ideal opportunity to risk assess and mitigate any problems that the business might have. And all that is just going through your processes. So it sounds laborious, but it's quite a good exercise to do. The monitoring aspect is where you're going to get your nuggets and hopefully some financial value. So it's a good forum to decide what data is going to be useful for you, what comparable data that you have, where you're getting your data, and do your audits show you any evidence of data at all? So when we talk about data, it's for you as a business to decide what is useful. It might be levels of sickness, it might be rate of sales, it might be scrap waste. There's too many industries that we audit to pin that down really, but that's what you need to decide. And of course, the risk of poor data means a financial cost in some respects, but it's also where we can find an opportunity as well. So it's a really good opportunity to drill down into what we want to know. And it sounds an obvious question. It's quite difficult to answer once you interrogate that a bit. Non-conformances I've covered on the next slide. I'll come back to that in a moment. But resources, key area that we need to drill down to. And again, this is all in the agenda. It's just not really that obvious. So how do we use what we have? So lots of businesses at the minute are struggling with getting not just employees, but the right employees. And of course, lots of places as well are also having quite a record-breaking busy time. So the obvious question when I speak to the guys on the floor and say, what make your life easier? They'll say more resource, we need more people because everybody's doing 3 jobs at once at the moment. So it's a good idea maybe to just have a look at how do we use what we have. And again, that might come back to your process performance and how we monitor that. Are we making things a little bit too onerous, a little bit too difficult for people to use? Can we cut anything out and still get an effective result? And that's the key thing. How are we planning what we do with resources? So resources covers, a multitude of sins, doesn't it? It covers people, it covers your infrastructure, it'll cover your fleet, it'll cover your finances. So actually having a plan of what we're going to do with those is pretty worth discussing. As well as resources, we want to think about our skill base, our knowledge base, and our image as well. Sales, let's keep going back to sales, not picking on salespeople really, I promise, but the actual method of selling has now changed. So the preferred way of knocking on a door or making an appointment to go in, speak to somebody, have face-to-face, build that rapport is now totally changed. It is a case of getting attention on a screen, getting somebody to accept a Teams appointment. In some cases, businesses are allowing salespeople in, but having reviewed resources, there's equally a lot saying, well, we can just have a 10-minute meeting. We don't need a lunch, or we don't need half a day. We don't need an appointment and you coming in disrupting the people working. We can do it this way. So having the resource of people who, if I pick up a phone and think, right, I want this, I'm going to try this person, not being put on hold from reception. Best way to put it, upskilling everybody to know as much as they can about your business and your product, so the first point of contact isn't being bounced on hold or moving to somebody else or onto a salesperson who may or may not know about the product I want to know about. So it's all going to come down to supply and demand, risk mitigation, and also you need to be considering upcoming environmental requirements as well. So it might be electric cars for company cars, it might be reducing the carbon footprint as well, all very exciting stuff. And again, even if you're not certified, it's a case of we have to start planning and putting these things in place. And some of them, everything with environment seems to require an outlay, bit of financial investment. So I don't know, I'm sure we'll hear a lot about it over the next 12 months. So the reason that I didn't include this with the non-conformancy part is when we talk about root cause and when we talk about analysis, a lot of the time what we will see is other, human error, lack of awareness, and what these are humanistic root causes. It doesn't actually tell anybody how we've addressed that. So I've used myself as an example. If you can't bring up your own faults, then, you know, who am I to point out anybody else's? So something I'm absolutely famous for is forgetting to amend the plan at the end of my audit report. Absolutely dreadful for it. So I thought, well, this is an ideal opportunity. So I've not amended my plan, but my customer next year, very experienced at audits, so they're not particularly phased. So what we might say is, does it matter? Because it's not affecting the customer. Well, part of our process is that we have to do that. So yes, I have committed a non-conformance because I've not reached the criteria as required by our process. So the argument of, well, it's human error, or we don't count that as a non-conformance because it doesn't affect the customer becomes a little bit irrelevant. I haven't followed the process. That's the nuts and bolts of it. So what will happen if I don't follow our process? Well, my report will get rejected. The impact is going to be the cost. So it's the cost that it takes for somebody to review my report, email me and say, right, you've messed up again, any chance you can go back in. It's my time, so it'll take me another 15 minutes or so to amend what I need to. So if I do 4 of those a week, then that's an hour, is it? Yeah, 15, that's half an hour. That's an hour of my time that I've cost the company because I've not followed a process. And potentially it can cost the client's time as well, because they might be wanting to chase for their certificate. So if you add all that together as a cost, that little, oh well, don't worry about it, it's human error, has quite a significant cost over time, or if you have 50 people doing exactly the same thing. So from that, I've got to learn. So I've got to look at, well, why? What was the root cause? Okay, human error. But what was my error? My error was I didn't follow the process. So it's coming back to that why, not the reason, the why. So the why was I'm often pushed for time. Our report format isn't always easy to use. And generally, I forget because I chat to my clients far too much. And that's the why. Okay, so I need to learn from that. And that's what we're looking for when we look at non-conformances within management review. It's not how many you've got. It's not, for want of a better word, it's not a stick to beat you. It's how we actually improve the business. So I'm going to learn. Next time I'm going to slow down, review my time management, and remember the customer experience isn't just me yabbering on, it's them actually getting that report and certificate at the end. I'm going to check if my action is effective, and in the future I'm going to ask my client for a reasonable time alone so I can complete my report, make sure it's complete and correct. And the improvement is going to be, it's going to reduce cost, stress, and hopefully a happy client. So hopefully that will give you an idea of the sort of thing that we're expecting to see within that non-conformance part of your management review. So who should attend? Ideally, everybody should have an input at each review, but resources would just be sky, wouldn't they? You know, we can't have the entire business closed just to have a review. So if you've seen my webinars before, you'll know I love this little model because it just remembers everybody really in the business. So we've got our support activities, which are enabling our primary activities, which are the money makers, so to speak. These are the people that are producing the product or the service and allowing the work to take place. So what you might want to do is complete a questionnaire, and you might want to send that out to all the departments and encourage them to input that and have that led by a department lead and have that fed back into the main management review. So what this does is it enable you to have not just management input, but the people on the floor who are using the processes, who know the processes, and will tell you quite honestly if there are any problems or ideas. So you might want to ask if you've got any health and safety concerns, any issues such as resources, suppliers, customers, any training needs. Are there processes we could make easier? Anything that you'd like us to do to improve the environment, or any positive customer feedback that we don't know about? So the benefit, of course, of that is that you are getting a company-wide opinion, but you're also going to get raw data from that as well, because your department leads may want to also answer these questions, but include performance data, near misses and incidents, significant points from meetings that they've had with their direct work cohort, which is often where the good stuff comes out, isn't it? And frankly, any data that you want from that particular department as well. You might ask for a brief overview prior to your management review meeting, so that you as the leaders or top management have time to digest the main points and think about actually what it is you want to know. And it might be a list or something like the below, and it might be something you want your lead departments to present to you on the day, either as a PowerPoint. They're becoming quite popular now because these are occurring over Teams, Skype, Zoom, what have you. But it gives you a nice overview and it provides you the right inputs, which we spoke about at the beginning. So just small example, the operations element of a business, they can briefly break down the most significant parts based on the questions we've just asked everybody and the information that's come back through to them. So they might want to bring up our internal issues at the minute, software affecting communication with the field. So that's going to be quite significant, and it's something that they will probably need to take to top leadership to see what can we do. Obviously don't want them buying huge software systems just on their own and isolating that. Might be they've identified just through asking, maternity and paternity cover will be needed next March. So that's going to be an internal issue, and we'll need to have a little process together to ensure that we're not down on resource. They've thought about the legal obligations as well, so they're quite happy that they're compliant, they've reviewed. However, supplier Jude Limited is not in a position to provide the data on emissions or health and safety or insurance due to issues. So again, that's something at top level in the management review. If you're having lots of problems like that, it's going to become quite significant, and it's information like that that might produce your objective. The objective may be to only use suppliers who can meet certain criteria or standards or provide information. Strangely enough, we then zoom into the objectives and the policies. So we've done the review, we've made sure that we're compliant due to no complaints, no accidents, and we've just popped in some new LED lighting. I say popped in like it's a cheap venture, but we know it's not. We're also going to look at sending customers flower seeds as a thank you, and therefore encouraging bees. So obviously this is if you've got 14,001, you're showing your commitment there to the environment, and I don't know, might be a nice thing to do, might not, I don't know, just made it up. The sales increase of 8% has required more planning time for ops. We may benefit from a weekly meeting together. So we're covering that review of the operational demand. We're also looking at communication and awareness. And we're thinking about that housekeeping element. Friday tidy's been agreed and improved Monday morning efficiency. So it's all really simple stuff. But if we look, all of it's hitting the criteria that is required from the management review agendas. You, the top management, will have informed your department leads or managers what information you want from data. So that's what they've gathered here for you. We've got 10% lost sick time. We're down 2% with non-conformances, and we've reviewed them. 50% feedback received from customers. Lead times increased by 25%, fuel usage down 15%, supplier reviews at 16 completed, and we're at 70% capacity. So this useful information here is now suddenly something that we can really get our teeth into and really digest. Before we know it, if you're getting this sort of information from all of your different departments and work cohorts, we can identify several different things there, can't we? Is the data consistent? Is it providing us value? And it provides us actually an output as well. So from this, we may find that we've got actions that we need to complete. And what we'll also do is we'll put a timed measure on that as well. So we might want a 6-month sickness program or anti-sickness program, a monitoring exercise, maybe investigation as to what sort of sickness they're having. Is it always stomach aches? Do we need to do some hand washing training? Do we need to look at the sickness process perhaps? We can see that non-conformances are down 2%. Why are they down 2%? Was there a trend in what we're down on? we've suddenly got 50% of feedback. So what did we do differently this year to last year to find out what our customers actually think about us, and what are we doing with that information? Lead times, worryingly, they've increased by 25%. Okay, so we know there's a massive supply chain issue across the world, really, at the moment. Is 25% acceptable? Have we controlled our suppliers enough to know that they're actively doing something about it? Or do we need to look for others? So Jude Limited wouldn't be able to tell you any of that by the looks of it, because they look a bit, you know, not very good. But this is something through your then supplier reviews that you might identify and as a company start making really important decisions about. We can see that fuel usage is down by 15%. So again, if you 14,000 registered, this is a really good thing for you in terms of your objectives perhaps, and showing how you improve. But equally, from a finance point of view, this should hopefully be quite positive, and again leads back to your resources of what you can do with that if you need to. We also know that our capacity is at 70%, so it gives us that really valuable opportunity to once again review those resources and see where can we distribute, do we need to bring more people in, and it should, I suppose, be fed into this final box here that we can look at as well. We're using more PPE. Is that because we're busier? Are we being less careful? We need new equipment, training needs, budget for staff night out. I mean, that's obviously going to be maybe top of the list, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the benefits of including as many people in the business for an effective management review, and what sort of data you can pull from it. So there's nothing wrong with having the chats over the kettle or the chats over WhatsApp and Teams, all really, really valuable. But if we can just pull that into the formal meetings that we have, and if it's only once a year you're going to do this, great, but it's possibly a really good idea that you then set monthly targets of what you're going to review, and have this maybe as the overall end of year or beginning of year sort of motivation of what have we achieved. So the eagle-eyed of you may have noted that the one thing that was missing from all of those was a review of the audits as well. Kind of intentional, so that when you want to go and have a look at these slides to see how you can improve the management review, that you still have to think about it and not just sort of directly take what I've done as well. The audits should always be giving these answers anyway, really, through discussion and through the objective evidence. However, that's another story, because then we would have to look at the quality of the internal audit, and unfortunately I think we're just about out of time, aside from to say, for a truly effective engagement, always provide snacks. Your staff will love you, and at least if they're on a bit of a sugar high, you'll have a good energy meeting. So if you want any further training, then you'll get a copy of these slides anyway. I'm sure the links work. I can't say I've tried them myself, but you can always get in touch and ask for more or different webinars, or read our blog on the website, beg your pardon. We're running lots of different courses for you to get involved in. We are CQI and IRCA approved training partners, and can deliver virtual or in-house or wherever you want, really. And I'll say thank you very much, and try and operate if there's any questions. I don't think there is, so in which case, thank you, and hope you'll join us again sometime soon. Bye-bye.